very brief context about the Law Centre as a whole in Islington. So we're based in North London, and a lot of the public images of Islington are of significant wealth. But there is a lot of poverty. Rent levels are extraordinarily high. And the fastest growing sector of housing locally is private sector rented. There have been one or two documentaries showing landlords kind of letting basements with like low ventilation for like £250 a week, or a bed in a kitchen. So you can't actually open the door of the cupboard because your bed's in the way, and you have to move your bed every time. But because there is such pressure on the housing stock, people are paying those sorts of rents for ridiculously poor quality housing, and it gives people very few options. 45% of children and young people in Islington are growing up in poverty, and that's a really stark figure. What is happening locally, which again is true of a lot of areas, is an increased polarisation. So there is increasingly in our local schools the children of people on very low incomes and the children of people who are quite wealthy, and a sort of gap of people in the middle who've got some work. Things like the housing bill are presenting a real challenge locally. So quite extensive needs, and we have the highest rate of mental ill health in the country, which again is not an obvious feature until you look at some of the stats. And the Law Centre has been in existence for about 40 years. We offer a whole range of services across social welfare law with casework and advocacy, and we've got some specialist projects focused on young people in particular and on strategic litigation. The form filling clinic was developed a few years ago, and the current model was developed as part of our ASTF funded work for a big lottery grant. And really we've been trying to find new ways of tackling need without compromising on quality. So how is it that we help more people when there isn't a lot of money for more casework? The Law Centre used to have contracts in lots of areas of legal aid. We're still a legal aid contract holder, but obviously now for welfare benefits work, for example, there is only the upper tribunal work. And also, how do we embed some of that work with our specialist casework team? So how do we have something which doesn't dilute but adds to the value of our specialist casework? And really now the model's quite established, with referrals from our other outreach services feeding into the form filling clinic, and with quite a lot of interest from other agencies that we work with in partnership. And at that point, I'll hand over to Helen, who actually does the real work on the sessions.
Yeah, hello. So I'm Helen Sheldon. I am one of our team of specialist welfare benefits caseworkers at the Law Centre. I noticed that in the handout I am given the title of solicitor, but in case that creates any expectations, I'm not a solicitor. I am a homebred, come up through the CAB system, specialist benefits caseworker, and no more than that. I arrived at Islington Law Centre at about the time that this form filling clinic started, slightly underoccupied, and said, oh, I can help with that. And it's gone from there. I do most of the day-to-day overarching administration of the clinic and supervise the sessions once a week, but with a lot of support from my colleagues, cross-covering, dealing with two difficult situations at the same time, etc. So the model which was set up is that we run a session once a week in our own offices. That in itself for us as in the benefits team is unusual because all our advice work happens outside the office in an outreach setting. So this is a rare occasion when people who might have some kind of benefits issue walk into our office to be seen. And we have 4 appointments available, subject to resources, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. The appointments are bookable a maximum of 2 weeks in advance, and all the appointment booking is dealt with by our reception team, who are receiving inquiries on the phone, by email, in person. We book 2 weeks in advance maximum for various reasons. One is that if you book further ahead, people then decide to go somewhere else to sort the problem out or do it themselves and don't tell you, and suddenly you've got an appointment that is cancelled at the last minute or become available at the last minute and you're struggling to fill it. It helps us to manage our volunteer resources so we can make fairly quick decisions, decide to allocate an extra appointment, maybe reduce the number of appointments in a particular week. We deal only with benefit claims, nothing else. So if somebody wants to apply for a blue badge, we don't help with that, or a taxi card. It is very specifically benefit claim forms, which are by and large rather more complex than those types of form. The sessions are always fully booked, and we have a high attendance rate, increasingly high as the years go by, probably because as we go along, we're getting much better at reinforcing information to our clients and making sure that they turn up. Our form filling clinic acts as a focus for the majority of our volunteers. So when we are recruiting volunteers, we are looking that they will attend usually at least one, hopefully 2 days a week, and that one of those days will be our form filling clinic day. It doesn't always work like that because volunteers have other activities. They're studying, they're working, they have caring commitments, but that is the general idea. We recruit from all over the place, from our website, from RightsNet, through universities, through volunteer programs, through people who are just making call inquiries to the law centre. And our volunteers have an incredibly diverse background. Very few of them have anything more than a very minimal knowledge of benefits when they come to us. So they may be students, law students doing LPC, GDL, they may be waiting to start studying, they may be between jobs, and those jobs may be absolutely nothing to do with benefits, nothing to do with law. They may be people who have just decided that they've got some time to volunteer and want to give a bit of extra time. As I said, very few of them come with much knowledge of the benefit system. And whilst they're with us, we encourage them, as well as helping us with filling in forms, to get involved and have a bit of an experience of everything else that we do in the team, whether that's the really grey bread and butter, chasing up letters, making phone calls to GP services, or going to observe advice sessions, observing tribunals, helping to write submissions and dealing with more nitty-gritty legal work. So what do we do with our volunteers for our form filling clinic? When I stop and think about it, I think it's frighteningly simple and unsophisticated, but it seems to work. We have enough volunteers that when a new volunteer arrives, they will generally shadow for the first couple of appointments, and then they'll be shadowing an experienced volunteer, resources permitting. Sometimes they'll be shadowing me, but that's not what we're aiming for. Once they get a little bit more confident, we'll try and make sure that if they've been shadowing people, claims for personal independence payment, that the next appointment that comes through for that, they will take the lead and the experienced volunteer will stay in the room with them to give them confidence. And as and when we think they're ready to fly solo, we let them work independently. We encourage them to do a certain amount, but very little background reading. So if we know that they're going to be seeing somebody who's making a claim for personal independence payment, we'll say, have a look at the Disability Rights Handbook. Have a look at this fact sheet. Read the descriptors, but again, no more than that. Throughout the session, I and or my colleagues are available to help. So we're always there to start the appointment off, make sure that we are all in agreement about what we're supposed to be doing and that we can do it. So, for example, that somebody hasn't missed a critical deadline, or that they've turned up to complete a form but the form hasn't arrived yet. So we iron out all the problems. We're there at the end to double check what's in the form. Basically on a Wednesday when we have the form filling clinic, I know that I must be able to get up from my desk at any moment, because at any time a volunteer could come down and say, we need your help. We've got a question. We've finished. Or I think, I haven't seen anybody for about an hour or an hour and a half, I'd better just check what's going on up there. So the structure works with very little formal training. So it doesn't take up very much of our time, to progress the volunteers through the system. And as I say, at the same time, they'll be helping with other aspects of our work, getting to know more about how the benefit system operates through different routes. And the astonishing thing, given the simplicity of the model, is that the success rates are probably as good as if I'd done the forms myself, given the extraordinary uncertainty of the DWP's decision-making process. Of our known outcomes, about 75% are successful, and that's been consistent across the 3 years. I've got a slide that's after this, just to give you a little idea of the sort of money figures we're talking about. But we know that the information we get back is the baseline, and that probably the financial outcomes are better than we know, either because we haven't been told them or because there are knock-on effects of somebody being awarded a particular benefit or getting an increase in a particular benefit that might increase other benefits that they're entitled to, or mean that somebody else in the household can claim benefits. So our clients are pleased because by and large they get a good result, and the ones who don't get a result, where we are able to contact them or they contact us, are pleased because we refer them straight into the advice system. So this is a bit of what Ruth was talking about making sure that this is embedded and sits well with the work, the specialist work that we do. And one of the things we say to the clients when they come is, please tell us the outcome. If we're not happy with it, we'll make sure you get advice. And the interesting thing is, of course, just as in our cases that come through other routes, the people who are not successful or who don't get as good a result as we would have hoped tend to get a better outcome once they go to mandatory reconsideration or go to appeal. So this 75% success rate is that's the lowest of the possible ways of measuring it. But for the clients, it's not just about the money. It's a very rare occasion for people who, by and large, are very isolated. As Ruth said, we have the highest proportion of people with mental ill health in the UK, in Islington. It's about the fact that they get to spend half a day with somebody who wants to talk to them and wants to listen to them, which means that they probably tell our volunteers things that they have never told a professional before because there isn't time. In 10 minutes with a GP, not a lot can be said. You're dealing with one main presenting problem, which means that they're more confident then to talk about things which are perhaps they're a little bit shy about, or to raise other issues. And we will pick up from the things that they say other potential issues, make sure that they get referred for advice in other disciplines in the law centre or outside the law centre, or that some other benefits problem that crops up gets dealt with. We do not give advice during the form filling clinic, and that's a golden rule. Volunteers are not allowed to give advice. I don't have time to give advice, and we're very firm with our clients when they say, oh, is there something else I could ask you about? And the answer is, well, you can ask me, but I'm not giving you advice now, unless it turns out that it's so pressing and urgent that something must be done that minute. They will be referred. So those are the benefits for our clients. Facts and figures, just very briefly. In the first year of the project, we helped it with the completion of 115 applications. We know the outcomes of 71 of those. The reason we don't know the rest is either because the person's mobile phone number has changed or doesn't work anymore, or they don't respond to voicemails. They haven't voluntarily told us. There's no other easy way of finding out. And we don't pursue them till the bitter end. After 2 tries, we stop because we just don't have the resources. So of those 71, 56 known awards with gains of at least £217,000. And not that dissimilar, except the figures are going up. So we've seen a few more people, very few more in 2014-15. We managed to retrieve more outcomes. That's partly because the decision-making process has got quicker, which means people remember what's been going on in their lives. In the first year, we were dealing with things like PIP claims and ESA 50s, where the PIP claims were taking up to a year to decide, and ESA 50s weren't leading to medical examinations within a year either. And then people just forget where it all started. This year so far, we're going to exceed the outcomes of the first 2 years with no more resources, possibly if anything less, but we're just running a slightly smoother operation probably. So that's just facts and figures. For the volunteers, what are we doing for them? Most of them have never had an experience of speaking to somebody they've never met before and trying to get information out of them, and very specific information, following the route of a form. They are always amazed when I come into the room and ask a question which they've been trying to get an answer to for 20 minutes, and within 2 minutes we know the answer. And that's part of what they're learning, how to get information, get the right information and get it quickly, managing the client, stopping them from talking, or saying, that's not the question I asked you, what I need to know is this. Learning to ask difficult, embarrassing questions, asking people you've never met before, particularly somebody of the opposite sex, a question about their toileting problems is never easy. Having to deal with people who are being treated for cancer is often quite distressing. Talking to people who have suffered from abuse of some sort, or who've got very distressing mental health problems. And they learn how to do that. They also learn how to cope with it. And one of the things we're very careful to do is, it's obvious when you go into a room whether it's going to be a difficult appointment, and by the end it's even more obvious, is that we make time at the end of it to talk to the volunteer, to give them a bit of support, so that they don't carry that with them on their own. They're also often not very good at writing concisely, so they'll fill up a form saying things they don't need to say, and you say, you don't need to write long sentences, you can do it like this. How about writing a list? How about trying it this way? So they're learning basically broad transferable skills that will stand them in good stead anywhere. At the same time, of course, they're developing knowledge of the benefit system, and are, like anybody who's new to it, just staggered by the complexity of it, staggered by the forms that people have to deal with. And they're developing an insight into the types of people that are using the services of the Law Centre, the needs of the underprivileged in a London borough. Most of our volunteers leave either because they've got a job, they seem to be rather successful at that, or because they're going to start full-time study. I don't know of any who've just sort of disappeared. I mean, there are one or two perhaps who've stopped because they've suddenly got new family commitments that mean they can't devote the time anymore. But there's nobody who's just vanished. We've got no volunteers who just suddenly disappeared and not come back. And their feedback generally is very positive. The volunteer who wrote the first little soundbite, thank you so much for allowing me to volunteer at the Law Centre, she got offered a job out of the blue when she'd been with us for about 8 weeks, about 2-3 weeks ago. And she's taken the new job, but it's a term-time only job, and we've had an email from her today saying, I really miss the Law Centre, and can I come back in the school holidays? And in the meantime, she had a particularly distressing experience dealing with a lady who was being treated for cancer, who was actually asleep, or appeared to be asleep through most of the appointment, came with her husband, and it was very traumatic for her. And that lady has just heard within the space of a month that she's been awarded the enhanced level for daily living and for mobility, for PIP. So she was a very inexperienced volunteer when she did that. She'd worked in housing. She's enjoyed it, and she's up for more. As far as we're concerned, it's a win-win model. In fact, it's more than 2 wins. It's probably win-win, win-win. Our clients win. One of the things I haven't pointed out before is that the availability of services for filling in forms is declining. There's less of it in Islington than there used to be. They get access to other advice because we pick up other problems and signpost or refer. Our volunteers gain, they're gaining experience. We gain as caseworkers because it frees up our time to see clients, to do things other than filling in forms. And the organisations that fund our advice work gain because we are not using the appointments that they fund to fill in forms. So it really is win-win, win-win. that's all I've got to say at the moment. So I suggest maybe that you say a little bit about the Bristol project, and then we talk about everybody else's experiences and take questions.
Hello, I'm Richard Stacey, not Claire Carter as advertised. Sorry for the disappointment. Hidden in a particularly grotty part of the least fashionable end of Bristol, there is a genius scriving away, and has done for donkey's years. His knowledge of benefits law is so extensive that I liken him to the Stig of Social Security. Some say that he indeed error-corrected and proofread the Beveridge report before it was published, and that 30 years ago he kidnapped Ian Duncan Smith and has replaced him with a B-movie actor playing a pantomime villain. However, in August 2012, at the height of the migration from capacity benefit across to employment support allowance, he became keenly aware of the fact that you can't cope with all the appeals that were coming through. And so, with an absolute visionary moment, reached out to the University of West England and said, do you have any bright law students that want to learn how to represent at first tier tribunal? Did they? Good heavens. They recruited, went through a rigorous recruiting process, where it had to sit tests. Distressingly, the quality of written work of modern graduates is something of a worry. But what the hell? That's modern education for you. Went through a rigorous recruitment process. We brought them up to speed, gave them a training pack, and the LASP model was born. Legal Advocacy Support Project runs as follows. You have a key caseworker at the centre of it, in this case, Andy. And Andy has students working with him. Andy will meet the client, first interview, establish that there are merits to the appeal. They exclusively and solely deal with work capability assessment appeals. Once that interview established merits, Andy then backed off and becomes supervisor. The student then continues the interview, writes the client care letter, obtains medical evidence, writes the witness statement, writes the submission, and attends the tribunal as representative. Each stage has to be signed off by the supervisor, that being Andy. That was the fledgling way. Then, after a while, you had students that were quite easily able of supervising their own. And therefore, Andy took a further step back, and you had yet more students coming in that would then report to supervising students. So a supervising student would have 1 or 2 cases of their own. They would then be supervising students who had cases of their own, who would do the same things. As a result of which, in the 3 years that the project has been running, we've done 256 appeals and have raised over £1 million because we've got a 95% success rate. I kid you not, a 95% success rate. It's done because it's an organic and learning process. Templates where contemporary legal argument has worked goes into a folder so that if you meet Joe Bloggs and Joe Bloggs meets Descriptor 1, you go into Descriptor 1 and that model submission is there. And those are updated regularly. The idea was to remove Andy from the coalface and yet still carry on with the level of work that he did. And as he said to me this morning, if you're running 4 students, they've got 12 cases between them. And they can run those 12 cases in far greater detail than one caseworker can run 12 cases in the time frame of an appeal. Certainly given how the time frames of appeals have compressed so much over the time. I was given a further example this morning of a case where, a relatively recent case, where a client with severe mental health problems had problems with their witness statement to the extent that 13 drafts had to be sent out and agreed by the client before they would sign it. Now, as caseworkers, I sat there, I thought, 13, you're having a bubble. I wouldn't have gone that far. And how many people here in this room have time to do 13 drafts of a witness statement? It's a brilliant scheme. It won a Law Centre Award this year for outstanding achievement in the South West. As I say, 95% success rate, 256 clients that have come through the doors that would not otherwise have been seen, and £1 million, £5,000 on average to the client. What are the problems though? The problems are, quite simply, you're dealing with students. Students aren't necessarily based where they go to university, and you will have the problem of them suddenly not being there for a month or so, and you have to manage that. How do you deal with the admin? Well, you have to have administrators, volunteer administrators in to take the burden again away from the caseworker, else he ends up having to do all the admin that you would otherwise expect. Excuse me. Thirdly, the space in your building is only finite. And if you've got 20 students, we've currently got 18 students on our books, 18 students coming into the building at various days of the week according to their timetable, then you are going to have problems in terms of operations. But these aren't insuperable problems, and the scheme does work. I flagged them up to you because otherwise I'd be just telling you it's absolutely marvellous with no downside. What are we doing with this project? We've seen that it works. We've done that classic 3-year thing, invented it, bench tested it, and now seeking ways to improve it. We're seeking ways, what we're doing now is moving it into PIP claims. And let me be very clear about something that I shouldn't have made clear right at the beginning. This is appeals, not mandatory reconsiderations, not form filling. SSCS1 has been issued. Bundle received, then you get to meet the student. Because there's no work to do until you've got the bundle back. And that's when you get to meet the student, and that's when you move on. What we're now doing is moving this into the weird and wonderful world of PIP, and starting a project that I'm heading up called the PASS Project. Now the PASS Project has 3 elements to it, which is particularly exciting. We've got 2 students, Stephanie and Man, who are quite brilliant, and we're going through all the successful files that LASP have won and identifying those persons that we deem entitled to PIP that aren't currently in receipt of it or in receipt of DLA. Do they need any community care needs or needs assessment or carers assessment? And, more particularly, is there in there an obvious test case arising from MM, which you may or may you probably all know about, to see whether or not we can change the way the assessment the assessment level process is run. That's one element that we're doing. The next element in terms of expansion is to look at using volunteers in a similar model for housing issues, homelessness applications, etc. That's currently being bench tested and developed, and it's not currently live, but that's another way forward. We're also looking to do it in employment law as well. We feel that this model of having a caseworker working with students is so effective that it can translate into other areas of law and not just benefits law. And it's an area that we are very keen to bang the drum about, to invite you to consider adopting, because it's a very useful way to work. Happy to answer any questions you have on it. It's a short presentation. I've got a rotten cough. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.